It's back to school season, and at least at my house, there's a mix of emotions. Some kids look forward to seeing all their friends again. My 7-year-old couldn't have run faster out the door. While others might be worried about surviving another year of algebra tests. But if you're a student in Iraq, that test anxiety, it might reach a whole new level.
Sometimes it gets really bad that students faint in the middle of the exam, or there are students that get heart attacks, which is not surprising.
This is Mazen Riyad. He's a 20-year-old college student in Mosul, Iraq, and this test he's talking about, it's the 12th grade government exam. Mazen took it just a couple of years ago.
In America, I guess it's called senior high school something. So it's the last year before college. So everyone's stressed about that.
This big test is sort of like the SAT, except that it's both the final exam for students graduating high school and the test that colleges in Iraq use for admissions. It's make or break.
It's from the government. So the whole country do this exam at the same time. All cities, all students, around 500,000 students who does this exam at the same time.
These exams happen in the summer, and it is hot, which might explain some of the fainting.
In my city, Mosul, which is north of Iraq, which is not the hottest region in Iraq, there was some days that it was 50 degrees Celsius.
That's 122 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah. So it's we're midway till boiling point.
And there's no air conditioning.
Just maybe fans, and the best they can do is just they give you cold water or something.
But Mazen says that the heat, it doesn't really register.
I mean, see, when you're having this exam, just remember everything I said about how stressful the exam is. The weather is really a trifle compared to it. The weather is just a little thing on the side. You're already cooked, so the weather doesn't really matter.
Mazen says that a test proctor once got in trouble for using a piece of paper to fan a student who wasn't feeling well, because it might have given the student an unfair advantage. And lately, concerns about cheating have been coming up a lot in Iraq.
This is the only exam that matters in your life. So I'm not really expecting people to be moral, oh no, I'm not cheating. No shit, people are gonna cheat because their whole life is revolving around that exam.
As it turns out, you might know, the internet is a pretty great resource for cheaters around the world. In Iraq, sometimes people leak the questions for this test online. And the government, well, they handled that problem by just turning the internet off.
It's not just the Wi-Fi or anything, it's the whole internet, mobile data, everything.
And it's not just for students or locally around the testing centers. The whole country loses the whole internet for most of the day.
Before the exams by 5 hours, and after the exam by 3 or 2 hours.
There are also shutdowns for exams that the 9th graders take in Iraq, and the seniors test different subjects on different days. So in the end, it adds up to a whole month of sporadic internet outages.
And here's where it gets even messier. University exams happen in the same period of time.
Mazen didn't feel as panicked about the high school exams as some of his classmates. But now he says that the internet blackouts, they really cramp his style.
Because English language major, I study novels and stuff. So I just read a lot of things. I have to read a lot of things. And it's all on the internet. This year was so annoying because I wake up every day before the exam trying to do some revision and no internet. So I'm just, sit there, do nothing, and try, to read whatever I have downloaded, which sucks.
Losing internet is a huge disruption to lots of people. Students can't study, some businesses have to close, and emergency services can become hard to reach, making a crisis situation much more dangerous. Mazen says that shutdowns still feel a little bit like an experiment, because widespread internet use is still fairly new in Iraq.
After 2015 or 16, in the ISIS period, my city got invaded by ISIS and all that jazz. That's another story. But for me, I remember it started happening from 2017 and on.
But Iraq is not alone in this approach to managing cheating during school exams. Ethiopia, Algeria, Uzbekistan, Syria, Jordan, portions of India, They've all implemented similar policies. And countries everywhere are deep in debate about how and why the government should be able to shut it all down.
Sudanese protesters gathered in these streets a few weeks ago, and the internet was also shut down.
Governments who say we have to do it for the sole reason that we're facing huge security concerns.
Now, France is further preparing for a partial internet shutdown in an attempt to disrupt the riots.
Even right here in America.
Right now, China, the government, can disconnect parts of its internet in the case of war. We need to have that here, too.
I'm Lacey Healy, and this is Things That Go Boom. Hey there. A quick favor. Things That Go Boom is conducting an audience survey, and we'd be so grateful if you could take just a few minutes and fill it out. If you're in, please visit survey.prx.org/boom to take the survey today. That's survey.prx.org/boom. Thanks. Most of the time when an internet blackout happens, it's not because kids are cheating on a test. More often, it has something to do with national security.
An internet blackout is the control mechanism to protect the critical infrastructure when a nation-state faces a cyber attack.
This is Dr. Patricia Vargas. She's a fellow of the Information Society Project at Yale and a fellow for the Internet Society. And just a quick note on terminology, what we're talking about today is internet blackouts, which is where the internet is turned off in a whole country or region. This is different from cases where a specific website or platform like Facebook is blocked. That's basically just good old-fashioned censorship. And even though it's very catchy and we almost used it as the title of this episode, we're going to try to avoid using the term internet kill switch.
For a while I used it, but I ended up discarding it because kill switch refers to a unique point that you can press to put down the whole internet, and that such a thing does not exist.
Much like the launch of a nuclear weapon, there's not a big red button that turns off the internet.
Putting down the internet, it's a very complicated process.
In a place like the US, for example, it might be almost impossible to fully 100% kill the internet. But there are ways to stop the flow of internet traffic in a region.
The easiest way to deprive the people from internet service, just to go into the companies. But that's not the only element that you need to disrupt. A more or less tech-savvy person can find other ways to connect to the internet.
To really stop the flow of internet traffic, you'd need to disrupt the physical infrastructure or maybe mess with something called the domain name system, or DNS, which makes web addresses readable for humans.
Behind every website, there is a huge 1012 binary number. The human brain cannot remember that every single time you go to a website, but the human brain can process something like www.something.com. If you have the DNS down, you may well, to some extent, say the internet is down.
So countries around the world have figured out their own strategies for doing this. They might order the internet companies to stop service, or they might mess with the domain name system. Or if it's a small area, they could use a jammer to scramble signals. But the trick isn't so much figuring out how to do it as it is deciding when the government might be justified.
We can have as many definitions of national security as we have nation states in the world.
The threat could stem from an accident, it could be a domestic attacker, or it could be a foreign threat. The idea of a foreign attack actually gives a lot of cover to internet blackouts, especially in non-democratic regimes.
This goes a little bit into the traditional politic rhetoric of the dictatorships, right? The reasons for things to be bad are always to blame the foreign power.
But what's really happening during a lot of blackouts is political maneuvering. Something happens that the government in power doesn't like, so they try to stop it by turning off the internet. And in case after case, sides square off in a debate between national security and freedom of expression.
The Indian government argued it needed to block the internet, but the court found the government had breached telecom rules,
which would give the Hong Kong government and police a bit more power for clamping down on the internet as well as publications. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but officials have not ruled it out.
Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif on Wednesday warned protesters the government's response to the unrest would be, quote, iron-handed.
You know, the word jammer is very common in Pakistani lingo.
Zoha Siddiqui is a journalist in Karachi, Pakistan.
And a jammer essentially is a device that's placed to shut down cellular signals.
So jammers can take down mobile networks in a local area, which does disrupt some internet traffic. It's how Zoha remembers the internet going down when she was a kid.
When I was growing up, the government used to shut down all mobile networks. And when I say all mobile networks, I don't mean just the internet, but basically all cellular services on Ashura, which is this Muslim event. It's basically a day of mourning for people who were part of the minority Shia sect, take out processions, and these processions were vulnerable to terrorism, right? So there were a couple of really terrible incidents of suicide bombings taking place while these processions were carried out. And so in order to mitigate or prevent that from happening, the government's remedy was to basically shut down all cellular services, which I thought was a little counterintuitive, because in the event that something happens, how do you call for help? How do you call emergency services? How do you get people to hospitals, right? But this was all too common growing up. They don't do it anymore. They usually shut down just internet over a small localized area. But growing up, I remember around noon, you lose all bars, all reception, and then it comes back around 8, 9 p.m.
In Pakistan, the legal authority for the government to do this isn't really contested within legal or political systems.
So there certainly is civil society pressure here locally to ensure that the internet is free for all, but no political pressure as such.
Which is how Pakistan can implement blackouts several times a year. Zoha says that they happen regularly around religious events and to quash protests. But one recent shutdown, it felt very different.
So the internet shutdown took place on the 9th of May, and it really caught me off guard.
It started after former Prime Minister Imran Khan was arrested, and protesters took to the streets.
Footage of his arrest shows paramilitary forces in riot control gear, leading a surrounded Khan into a black van.
When he was arrested, I was not at home, actually. I remember rushing back because the moment protests happen, streets get blocked. And so I remember rushing back and sort of scrolling through Twitter, and then the internet just sort of, it's like I was just sort of in the car losing bars, and I thought, oh, there must be something wrong with reception in this area, only to realize by the time that I got home that the internet had been shut down.
Oh, geez. So you were like watching it disappear in front of your face, essentially.
Disappear. Yeah.
Unlike shutdowns that happen predictably around certain events, this one came as a surprise, and it had no end in sight.
And I live in Karachi, which is the largest city, and protests tend to get violent. And my dad is 63, and he was out, he was at work, and he had to get home in the evening. And I didn't know how to contact him, right? And I remember that's when I tried to find a landline in this house, and I couldn't find one. Eventually, he got home a little late because the route that he takes tends to get blockaded whenever protests take place. And I remember I was freaking out. And honestly, I had no contingency plan. I didn't know what to do. I just remember thinking, okay, if he's not home by 8:30, I'm going to drive out and see where he's at.
Drive out potentially also into the violence.
Right. Yeah.
To look for him,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Then Zoha realized she had another problem. Much like Mazen, she couldn't work.
I'm a reporter, I'm a journalist, and most of the work we do is online, right? So when the internet shutdown happened, I was in the middle of reporting a story. It was time sensitive. I was on deadline. And all my recordings and transcripts were in the cloud. I used this transcription service to transcribe my interviews, and basically nothing was working, right?
As a freelancer, an internet outage could put Zoha and many other people in Pakistan out of a job. In this particular case, the government only cut mobile data services, but the Wi-Fi connections that remained were bogged down by the influx of traffic from people who normally use phones and mobile hotspots. So the internet was still unusable even for those who theoretically had a Wi-Fi connection. And without internet, chaotic scenes played out across the country.
You don't think about how dependent you are on the internet until it's shut down. right? I remember went to get groceries that weekend, and there was a huge line at the supermarket because credit card POS machines weren't working, right? And so the folks at that supermarket had picked up their little POS machine and had taken it to the shop next door that had Wi-Fi that was somehow miraculously working. And so you sort of got your bill and then you had to run to the shop next door and then swipe your card. And there were similar scenes at gas stations, at supermarkets, basically anywhere where you would have to make a credit card-based payment. I took my cat to the vet and had to pay in cash because their credit card machines weren't working. So I left him at the vet, ran to the ATM, withdrew cash, and then paid them. So it was ridiculous. It was like nothing I ever imagined.
After 4 days, the blackout lifted just as suddenly as it started, and life more or less returned to normal.
I did consider getting a landline. Then I found out that the process of getting a landline is nightmare-inducing, and then I didn't. There's a lot of paperwork involved, which I don't want to get into. I don't have time for that. But for a hot second, I was like, okay, I need a landline.
Blackouts, including surprises like this one in Pakistan, they're happening with more and more frequency around the world.
Between 2018 and 2023, the situation just went out of control.
South Asia and the Middle East are best known for this tactic. India has had far more internet blackouts than any other country. The Kashmir region often has long blackouts, and there's currently an indefinite blackout in the northeastern part of India. But these types of blackouts have extended to the rest of the world.
Before 2021, the only country in the Americas who had had a blackout was Venezuela in 2013. But since that point, now it was Cuba, and there are more episodes in Australia. Government always claim an accident. Unfortunately, in the case of Australia, and in the case of the well-consolidated democracy, you started to see some common variables that are of some concern.
For example, when one internet service provider controls the internet access for 70, 80, 90% of the population, that's a concern. It just makes it easier for a leader to order a blackout. But still, it's hard to imagine this happening in the U.S. I mean, could a U.S. president really just up and turn the internet off? That's after the break. You may not have heard much about it, but the U.S. has been debating this exact question for a long time. Since 2011, 4 different bills have been introduced in Congress trying to clarify what the president can and cannot do when it comes to turning off the internet. And the legal basis for this authority actually goes way back to the early 1900s.
You have provisions from the Radio Act of 1912, actions of the military to seize control of the AT&T telephone system during the World War I. The Radio Act of 1927 has similar provisions. Then comes the Telecom Act of 1934, which actually compiles all those previous practices and makes them formal.
The 1934 Telecommunications Act says that the president can take over telecommunication systems in the interest of national security. And at the time, that probably would have meant taking over a broadcast for military purposes, or, say, shutting down a radio station that was working for the Germans. But for a while now, Congress has been trying to figure out how to bring this bill up to speed in the age of the internet. There was one new Telecommunications Act passed during the Clinton administration, but it didn't really do anything to address these questions of presidential power.
There were 3 bills between 2009 and 2011 to grant powers to the president to shut down the internet. So the 3 bills fall in the same exact debate all the time. You have the government wanting to do this to protect the critical infrastructure and the national security of the United States. Another part of the government, another sector of the politicians and civil society opposed to this because the government is not clear about the limits of the president's authority. You maybe have heard the term as cyber Pearl Harbor, right? This is a massive cyber attack over the critical infrastructure that will threaten the life and stability of the United States. Fine, that's a term that was defined in a very vague way. When are we talking about a massive cyber attack? It's an unhappy term. I don't know if you understand what I mean. Unclear from my personal standpoint of view.
So one side of the debate is talking about national security, and the other side is talking about freedom of expression.
There's really no way of finding a middle point.
But in the meantime, the U.S. did have an internet blackout.
There is an episode called or known as the Bard episode of 2011.
The operators of the San Francisco subway system are facing intense criticism following their decision last week to temporarily cut off underground cell phone and mobile internet service at 4 stations in an attempt to foil a protest.
The Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART, is the transportation authority in the Bay Area of California, which covers San Francisco and Oakland. And in 2011, a police officer in a BART station shot and killed a man named Charles Hill. The incident sparked major protest.
So what happened in the BART facility is that suddenly the messaging system and the wireless system went down. So this is not an issue of I'm going to use my megas, my own data. No, everything was down.
Civil society groups later filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the Department of Homeland Security, trying to figure out how exactly they decided that a shutdown was necessary.
But because issues of national security were involved, the court did not back the petition. They ruled in favor of the DHS. And how this was accomplished, or a further explanation of why, the DHS never provided any further detail.
This was a pretty isolated case. It didn't happen during any other major U.S. protests in the following years. And so most of the energy prior to 2016, it was focused on attempting to clarify the rules for the president and give the executive branch specific updated authority to control the internet in a, quote, emergency. But some of that energy shifted when former President Trump was elected.
ISIS is recruiting through the internet. ISIS is using the internet better than we are using the internet, and it was our idea.
During his campaign, President Trump had suggested that he would get Bill Gates to help him shut down the internet as a way to prevent ISIS from recruiting people online. What exactly he meant was kind of unclear. But in 2020, Congress introduced another bill, this time called the Preventing Unwarranted Communications Shutdown Act. And this one, it was focused on limiting the reasons that the president could order a blackout. But this just ended up being the fourth failed attempt to pass a bill that would update the rules. Congress can't agree to give the president explicit power to turn off the internet, but they can't agree to limit the power either, which means that as of today, we're still using that same law from 1934. And the president could order a blackout kind of whenever they want.
It's in the mindset of the executive branch that if it's the case that a measure of this type is necessary, the president has the power to give and to sign an executive order that mandates an internet blackout. That's what they think.
There would probably be legal challenges. But Patricia says leaving this option so open is dangerous not just for the U.S., but also for the world.
We have to have in mind that when the traffic goes down in a country, that has an impact on another nation state. In Latin America, we used to say that when the U.S. sneezes, we get pneumonia.
Nation states can try to exercise sovereignty over their own little piece of cyberspace, but in the end, it's all still connected. And we may just not be able to close the loopholes or clarify the authority of the president.
Are we going to keep this endless debate between the freedom of expression and the limits of national security policies? There seems to be an endless debate and really not an outcome, right? And this is probably an already 100-year-old debate.
But Patricia says that maybe we can shift our focus to make potential blackouts less frequent and less damaging.
So maybe in the future, instead of discussing about how to regulate blackouts, maybe we should focus in better measures to prevent those things that we want to avoid, like your national uprisings or cyber attacks. I have the fortune to say that whether I was here in the US or in my home country, I was never limited in terms of freedom of expression. I have enjoyed an open and free open internet. I would like it to remain like that, and I'm sure most of internet users would like that too.
In the meantime, maybe it's not such a bad idea to get a landline, in case those mobile networks go down. Things That Go Boom is distributed by Inkstick Media and PRX. Don't forget to send your questions about the internet and security to boom@inkstickmedia.com. We will answer them in a special Q&A episode later this season. And while you're at it, leave us a review. They really do help folks find our show. This episode was produced by Nikki Galtland with a little help from me and edited by Katie Toth and Christina Stella. The music for our show is written by Darian Schulman, and Robin Wise makes each episode sound its very best. Thanks, as always, to the supporters and foundations that make our work possible. The Carnegie Corporation of New York and Plowshares Fund, as well as Inkstick supporters, including the Colomb Foundation, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Prospect Hill Foundation, and the Jubitz Family Foundation. In 2 weeks, we'll be talking about AI and climate change. See you then.
I haven't seen anyone use a landline in years.
Same. So we are in the same situation.
I don't even know what it looks like anymore.